Good morning, and welcome to the August 15th, 2019 Downtown Design Review Committee. First item on the agenda is roll call.
Anthony Black.
Present.
Corey Bates.
Present.
Gary Jones.
Here.
Julie Kriegel. Present. Deborah Richards. Mariana Sidor. And Rosie Trujillo. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Second item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. Your minutes are in your packet, and if there are no comments, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Second. That's a Bates Jones motion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item 3 on the agenda is cases withdrawn, and there are none. Item 4 is continuance requests. There are no items. Item 5 is the consent docket. There are no items. Item 6, cases for individual consideration. Item A is DTCA 15-00005 at 100 South E. K. Gaylord Boulevard. Is the applicant present?
Yeah, the applicant is here, and I'll introduce the project. This is at the Santa Fe station. Over the past many years, there have been a lot of improvements to it. They restored the original station building. They redid the parking lot and landscaping on the west side. The original project contained a tunnel excavated through the railroad tracks on the west side that would connect to the canal. And for very many reasons, that tunnel couldn't happen. So in the meantime, the design team is, in order to fulfill some of the grant funding requirements, they needed to establish some sort of visual connectivity, trying to somehow otherwise link to the Bricktown Plaza portion because they couldn't actually connect through. And they've done that through some sidewalk and ramp they proposed to do it through some sidewalk and ramp improvements through the tunnels on Reno and Sheridan. One aspect of this connection idea is to install some freestanding monument elements that mimic the railroad structural supports, but they are considered a sign, and because of various utility and sightline requirements, the applicant believes they have to be located in the street right-of-way, and signs are not allowed in the right-of-way. So they need a variance, so it has to be heard by committee for a recommendation, for approval and a recommendation on the variance. And the applicant is here if anybody has any questions. And then I can answer some questions also.
Are there any questions for staff?
Just one. In the staff report, it noted that area stakeholders did not support the design concept for Bricktown portion of the project. Do we know why?
About last year or the year before last, there was an art project approved for installation on Mickey Mantle at the east end of the canal. It was a white abstract cube that's the shape of a brick core. That project included some signage markers, and all that was in a pretty contemporary style, and there was disagreement on whether the markers closer to the Bricktown side should mimic that or if it should go a different direction. And so because there was no agreement, they decided just to eliminate the ones on the other side of the bridge. And I don't believe, last time I drove by, I don't believe the ones on the east end of the canal have been installed yet. Yeah, I don't.
there are no other questions for staff, does the applicant have anything they want to add? Would you mind giving?
Russell McGee with TAP Architects. And just to continue, the Bricktown side is really maybe nomenclature or assigning gateway marker. So what we proposed were not gateway markers. You know, we changed on the documents because that was what we were kind of directed to call them. But they were more design features, as Lisa said. They were the colonnade, if you will, just to connect and to draw people into the underpass. And so we just mimicked that. And then added the signage. And then they became the gateway marker. We were told the Bricktown side had their own gateway marker. It was a light pole. And so that's why they were taken from that side.
I have no concerns with the location, as that's been referenced in the staff report. I do have a couple questions about the sign itself. Am I understanding correctly that the lettering for the sign is on the side of the sign that faces the building and not the side that faces Sheridan and Reno?
It is, like I say, it's an extension of the column, so there's signage on each side.
Oh, it's two-sided?
Yes.
Okay. I read this differently. And so it would say Santa Fe Station on both sides of both signs?
Yes. Or, you know, that can be, we could continue to talk about that if the different types of signage. There isn't any signage in the Santa Fe Station parking lot. There's only on the building. And it's, you know, it's quite a distance from the station to Sheridan or Reno, kind of a sea of parking, if you will. So we thought Santa Fe Station would be appropriate. Because at the beginning it did say Bricktown Canal Plaza.
Okay. When I looked through this and went out there, I was under the impression that the lettering was on the building side and not the road side. And that seemed a little counterintuitive to me, especially with, at the overpass, you know, there's the large signage for Bricktown. And so having letters on the side that faces the building, you know, when you're standing in that parking lot looking, you're seeing a sign that says Santa Fe Station, and then right above it you'd see that Bricktown signage, and the juxtaposition seemed like a lot. I wasn't sure if that was helping the cause or might have been hurting the cause.
I see, yeah, that's a good point. The location, like I say, there were design elements and then the signage were added, but we do feel like that Santa Fe Station does not, you know, really have any signage, as I spoke of, with the separation with the parking lots, and therefore Santa Fe Station, and it is in the parking lot,
Right.
does connect to the station itself.
Okay. I guess I haven't developed a full opinion yet. I'm just trying to understand everything.
Sure.
I'm having a little bit of a difficulty understanding scale with respect to the photograph that you've got in your packet that talks about tops of gateway markers at 12.6 and bottom of the billboards at 14.8. Could you explain, is it just an extension of the current colonnade, or is it a three-dimensional extension? Because in plan it references the northern end, which is more of a retaining wall. So is it three-dimensional in shape, and you walk through it, and is it an exact mimicking in scale and proportion to the colonnade that is currently on the south side of the photograph that's up right now?
And you're correct. It's exact same scale, same height. With the whole scale is identical. It does mimic and it is brought out a little further to where the repetition of the columns, it's now freestanding since it doesn't have the platform above, and we did move it over on the other side of the sidewalk. Couldn't put it on the curb. However, it's right there. And you look at the photograph, you would see it just there on the other side of in the planter.
So it is not an extension of the colonnade, it is a replication of the colonnade, but it is in line with the retaining wall on the north side?
Yes.
Okay. All right, that helps, because I was going to say in plan, it's referencing the next edge, and it also references a bend. Is there a bend in the plan seems to reference a bend in the geometry of this element? Is there a bend in it, as shown in plan?
It's going to be parallel to the columns.
Okay, so it's going to come out straight?
I know what you're saying. The planter does have somewhat of an angle to it, but no, it's parallel to the column.
So the 4 that is referencing back to the new gateway marker is referencing a bend in it that is not parallel to the current structure. Is that where the marker will be? Is non-parallel to the structure, oriented in?
It is parallel, and it's just moved over maybe a foot than what you see there in the drawing. But it is parallel. There's sufficient room for the turn of the pavers for the base of the marker to be there.
Maybe my question is, coming out from underneath the rail structure, I see a line that is oriented true west over on the north side of the road, and then I see a bend that is north of due west that heads off to the northwest side.
Correct.
I'm actually on the other side. Yeah. So that 4 that's right there beside your hand, that's the mark that says new gateway marker. It's pointed to the oriented north of due west.
Yeah, that's incorrect. There's not a marker on the north side.
Okay, that was the one that I was...
That 4 is, well, there's another, that's another 4 that's on the lower right. The marker we're talking about is only on the left-hand side of the
It says
page.
north side and south side, or east and west, I'm sorry.
That answered my question.
It is kind of confusing on the drawing. That was an intern, sorry about that. I actually did the same thing when I was reviewing it the first time. I was, what is these 4s here? Okay, it is understood.
Thank you.
So I'm going to harp on this just to make sure that we're clear. In the staff report, it states the signs are single-faced with the word Santa Fe Station on the side of the sign that faces towards the station. And so that's not the case.
That's not the case. Signage on both sides.
It's on both sides?
Yes.
Okay.
If there are no more questions from the commission, does anybody in the audience want to speak to this?
I'll move to approve the application on the basis that the project complies with the regulations and guidelines of the Downtown Design District zoning ordinance as referenced in section C and D of the staff report, with the condition that the applicant shall obtain a variance from the Board of Adjustment from the prohibition against signs in the public right-of-way.
Second.
It's a Bates-Krugel motion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
I will move to provide a recommendation of approval to the Board of Adjustment for a variance from the prohibition against signs in the public street right-of-way.
It's a Bates-Krugel motion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For the next item, I am going to recuse myself.
Okay, the next item, item 6B, 905 Northwest Hudson Avenue. Is the applicant present? Okay, we'll have staff introduce the project.
There was a handout provided right at the beginning of the meeting, and that was provided to staff, and we requested the applicant to bring you copies, and so that will be referred to today. You might recall at your meeting last month, staff, we had to continue this item because we weren't going to have a quorum to be able to discuss it, but the staff report contained last month was we requested it be continued so that we could work with the applicant to change the location of the rooftop mechanical screen, work on trying to see if we could change the color, change the spacing of the slats because we felt they were too far apart. The applicant has now provided a revised proposal which would entail removing the mechanical equipment screening which has already been installed, and revising the location. He wants to discuss the distance between the slats, which he feels are in keeping with one in the area of the collective, and the pictures of that were provided to you in your packet. And then the issue of color change is problematic because of the material this is made out of. It's not a material that you can paint. It's a material that you order in the color that you want. So currently, the way this has been installed is it's been installed on top of the parapet wall. As the staff report explains, this was installed not in keeping with what it was supposed to have originally been installed, and it is not in keeping with the building and all the renovations that have been done with the building. The project about a block away that he referenced was the collective, and that is one where he felt the distance they have between the slats is in keeping with or even less than what was approved for the collective. One of the things I wanted to point out is with the collectives, when you have a contrasting color, even when it's close to, say, the back of the parapet, it works better with the building. And I think one of the issues with, we're referring to it as the Jimmy's Egg building, even though there's 2 restaurants in it, is the issue that it's not the same color, but it tried to appear the same color as the brick, and so it's a brown and the brick is reddish, and so instead of contrasting, which staff feels works very well, it's not contrasting, and I think it detracts from the building itself. So the proposal, this is how it was installed, which is on top of the parapet wall. The revised proposal submitted would change the location instead of the front of the parapet, move it to the back of the parapet so that it wouldn't hopefully appear as much a continuation of the front facade of the building. The concern is they don't want to have to pierce through the roof. A new roof was put on, and any additional holes will pierce through the new material that they put on the roof, and they're trying to stay away from that. Moving it back to the back of the parapet will allow them to reuse the current support system that they put in. So here's a picture, and this happens to be on the south facade, and this is how it's currently attached, and they're proposing to cut it at the front and at the back, and then move that vertical support and install it at that location, which reuses how it has everything with how it's been installed, the structural supports of it. They're also proposing to reduce the height. Let me go back to that detail. They're proposing to, I believe it's take three of the horizontal levels off because they found that they could actually reduce the height of that because they don't need it to be that tall to screen the mechanical equipment. And the material, I believe, is it Truex? The material that it's of is a synthetic wood, and it was ordered in that color, and it doesn't accept paint, and is it Trex, I'm sorry, I knew it was a T word, sorry, it's called Trex. And so so it's kind of unknown. If they were to put paint on it, I don't think the paint will stick to it because of the type of material that it is. It's not like it's wood. And they chose that material because they wanted it to not be a maintenance issue, not be something that they were constantly having to replace it or paint it. So, and they have addressed potentially some of the concerns by moving it. The issue of color is one that I don't think can easily be addressed without a financial, additional financial investment, because it would be replacing the actual material. And the issue of the spacing between the louvers, he does have a valid comment about there's one just a block away that has, it's actually a bigger space between them. It has a different appearance, I think, because it's a contrasting color, but staff would agree that they have made a revision, and we're presenting this to the committee for their consideration. And I'll let the applicant, the architect, Mr. Hornbeek.
But Laura, I'll add, I'm sorry if you've
It's
already
fine,
said
and-
this, or the staff recommendation in the staff report was to relocate the screen much farther back and change the color. So this new proposal moves it a little bit further back and does not change the color.
We also were recommending that they reduce the distance between the horizontal members, and this does not propose to do that. But I'll allow Mr. Hornbeek to speak to all of those.
On that note, the spacing of the slats, is the screen at the collective screening mechanical units?
Let me go back to that picture. Let me just say that this screen up here, which is this one, is for the mechanical units. This on the right, that's the rooftop, but it all kind of ties together with the design, the material, and the color. But this one that you're looking at here, there is mechanical equipment behind it, which you can kind of see through that.
Do we have any additional questions for staff? Mr. Hornbeek.
Thank you for this opportunity to make this presentation and request. My name is David Hornbeek. I'm with Hornbeek Blatt Architects. And how we got to this is probably irrelevant now, because it is what it is, and we've got a situation where the screen is built and it's out flush. I think we all recognize it would be more sensitive if it were not flush with the face of the exterior veneer. The request, as I understood it from the last meeting when we got, what's the word? Continued, was to move the screen 2 feet back, was to consider changing the color, and to consider tightening the gaps on the screen.
I'm sorry, the item was not heard at the last meeting. So our staff recommendation is the same as it was at that meeting.
Was that not?
It wasn't discussed. The project wasn't heard.
Oh, okay, but I thought, so no one saw the staff recommendation?
They did.
Okay. Did I misquote it improperly?
Yes, it says move the screen off the parapet and locate the screen closer to the equipment.
Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead and read the whole thing. I'm okay with that.
It didn't specify 2 feet. Everything else you said was, the staff recommendation was move the screen off the parapet and locate the screen closer to the equipment, reduce the gap between the horizontal members of the screen, and change the color of the screen. That's what it read last time, that's what it reads this time.
All right. Well, when we looked at what is there and how we could do this in an effort, I recognize this is a compromise, but we hope you'll consider why our reasons are for several of these items. Can you go back to the
Which one?
the photographs of how it's connected?
Oh.
Want to go there. Our proposal is to cut off the diagonal brace that is already, what we're trying to do is retain and salvage as much of this material as we can to minimize the cost of moving this. And our proposal is to cut the diagonal brace off and the L-shaped portion of the bracket, so that we leave all of the longest posts that are already in existence, and our attempt is going to also be to leave the material on those panels that we can. Now, when we want that to be, there was some discussion, maybe, and I just want to point this out, that we thought the screens were too tall. Go back one more photograph. Not that one. The other direction. That way.
Oh.
I think that the idea that the screens are supposed to block the equipment, you can see that the screens are higher than the equipment is. And so our suggestion is another thing that would help make this look less intrusive is if we lowered the height of the screens. Let's leave it right there. You can see that if we could reuse the material and pull the longer post back, we could mount it back in the same mounting points along the back of the parapet, and we could also reuse the diagonal brace to brace that piece again. Our hope is to take off 3, if not 4 of those boards at the same time from the bottom and lower the height of the screen so that it will reduce the impression of the screen, and also allow us not to have to change any of the mounting brackets and or bolts that we already have established. Now let's advance forward. One more. You can see that this is one corner, but most of the wall, when you look at it, is almost 18 inches wide. It's double width, and it's got a large cavity between it. If we move that back, it will come back approximately 16 to 18 inches. Now, I know there's going to be a little detail area we'll have to work out back there, but the majority of the wall is exactly as you see it right there. Now, let's go back to the collaborative photograph. One more. If you look at that from the side, the distance from the face of the building to the back side of that screen is approximately 2 feet. We won't get quite that depth back, but we'll get within 4 to 6 inches of it. And I think that will do a tremendous amount to alleviate the appearance that was in this, that occurs when it's in the same plane. You can also see that in the areas where it doesn't have to be as tall, that it's also less obtrusive if there's only about 2 feet of it sticking up rather than 4 feet of it sticking up. In terms of the color, because the person that put it out there had actually applied and called it a parapet extension to you all, their goal at the time was to match the brick they did a pretty good job. You can see that the color is a pretty close color. We're concerned that if we paint the screen now, the paint will not adhere to the tracks. We believe that leaving the tracks in the color that it came pre-finished from the manufacturer would be the best solution for in the long run for everyone. It will require less maintenance and less sustainability. Now, I'm not saying that paint won't stick to it. I just don't think it'll stick to it very long, and then once it starts to peel off, we'll have a situation where it's splotchy. And we think in the long haul that the solution of leaving it in the pre-manufactured color is the best solution at this point. It's not the best solution in an ideal world, but it's better than painting it now. I would also point out that I think in your guidelines that discusses when screens are required, that the color is supposed to be compatible or match the outside of the building. If this doesn't match, it's certainly compatible. So we would like you to consider that when you're considering whether or not to have this painted. And then back in terms of, let's go back, Laura, to the photograph of the one that I asked you to get to. There, thank you. If you look on the right side, that is a vent coming out from the Jimmy's Egg. There's also a vent on the other restaurant. And because those ranges are on the exterior wall, those vents are very, very close to the wall. So that location of the vents on two of the elevations is going to limit how far back we could, it limited how far we could put the screens in the first place, and vents that are larger than 8 inches are supposed to be screened as well. And then there, I think we have a rooftop.
You do. I think that is up here. Give me a minute.
There.
There.
North is to the right, so the west elevation is up sheet. In the northwest corner, that unit is already within 5 feet of both of those walls. And there is, when you screen around a unit, there is a need to allow those units to get air to them and to be able to be serviced. So when you consider how far back we have to move it, the one directly south of it is also very close to the right in there. So we're limited in those areas, and that plan just shows the rooftop units. It does not show the two vents that come out almost on the exterior walls. So with that, we would ask that you consider our proposal to move the screen to the backside to allow us to lower it. You can see we have some room to lower it, to allow us to keep it in its pre-finished color and not change the spacing on it, because our spacing is actually tighter than the spacing on the screen at the Collective. That's what we would like you to consider, and if you will, then we will move it back, and I think it will ease the issue and the fact that this really doesn't make the rest of the building appealing. I stuck a couple of photographs in because I want you to know the owner on this project has spent $1.2 million to do this, and he is above his budget as it is already, and we're working our best to help him, and everything he's done on the inside is first class, along with the food and the service and everything they provide. So we humbly ask that you consider our request and hope that you'll vote for it. I'll answer any questions.
While I have this here, I just want to point out where it's actually located. So it wraps the corner a little bit and then just goes down this facade here and that around the north facade and then wraps a little bit. So between this and here, there isn't one, and we reference that in the staff report. There happens to be two large trees, one that's next to the entrance into the parking lot for this building, and then there's one on the property next door, which has the same property owner that's in the front yard. So you really don't have a view from the west or as you're traveling east because of the trees, as well as you can see how far back the units are set from that side. So staff was comfortable not having a screen from that direction.
May I make, there's one other point I'd like you to consider, and that is, this building had 8 mechanical units on it when we started. We ended up replacing only 2 of them. They're the 2 that are closest to the wall, the 2 that we discussed already. They're the new ones, and they're the ones that require the screening. As I understand it, by leaving the existing units there, we did not have to screen it at all, those units. So on my way down here, I drove down Hudson, and every building south of this, from Elemental past Ludovine, has no screen on those buildings, probably because they reused existing mechanical units.
And I would agree with Mr. Hornbeek, existing units don't have to be screened. One thing I will add, though, is I didn't realize the round vents are required to be screened if they were added, and they're not shown on here.
They're not, but there's one on the south side. The other one is directly west of the, in between the 2 units that I...
Okay, so you're saying one is here?
Yes,
somewhere.
That's about
okay.
exactly where it is.
Right.
And go back to the south side,
South
go a
side.
little further west,
Can
right
I
about
ask
there, right about there.
Right in here,
Can I ask
okay.
a quick question? Because on the plan, it actually shows only 2 are existing, and all the other ones are new.
Right, it does. Yeah.
Okay,
It's
all right.
saying new, and it says...
Pardon me, you're correct.
Okay.
You're
Okay,
correct.
just want to make sure, didn't know.
No,
was
I
right.
got those numbers
Right,
mixed up.
but I do agree with them. If they are existing, we can't require them to screen them. It's just if...
You know what, I don't have my glasses on.
If they put new
I think we
ones
put on there
or-
which ones were new and which ones were existing.
If they replace, then normally they're bigger, and so those need
That's
to be
correct.
screened.
You're correct there, Laura.
Besides on the spacing of the slats, understanding that what's being proposed is tighter than what is at the collective, is there any negative consequence to making them tighter? Even in line with proposing to make it shorter as well. I mean, if you're proposing to make them shorter, you know, I see that as an opportunity to make them tighter too.
Well, I think the simpler thing, our goal here, Corey, is to, because they're already built in panels, is to save the panel so that when we move it, we don't have to have all the labor to pull it apart. If we're going to screen, make it tighter, we might apply something to the back side and just totally enclose it rather than all the labor that it took to put those up individually. At the same time, though, I know you understand that the units do need air around them. So I think they work better for the units if they're allowed to allow some air through them.
I'll point out, the threshold for the screening is that it's not visible from ground level. A lot of the images we're looking at are close-up or true elevation, but the threshold for the code is from ground level.
Yeah,
The building conservation guidelines
Where's the
suggest that
picture?
level is across the street. But there's a lot of buildings that have various topographies, and it's probably unlikely
Okay.
that every single bit of equipment would be 100% screened from all view.
And with that in mind, I just thought that this is the north facade, which is probably the easiest one. There's a vacant field in front of it, and I took this from the other end of the block. And in our discussions we just had, there's a unit and a unit, and then somewhere in here is one of those round vents from the oven stoves. So I just kind of wanted to give that back.
That elevation is the one that we were looking at just from the other side, and that's the tallest area on the building. And we believe it certainly can come down lower.
Do we have any other questions for the applicant? Thoughts? Well, I understand all of the ramifications that come into play with modifying the screens. But at the same time, I feel that what's being proposed isn't quite there yet. And I don't know that there's a path to saving both the roof penetration locations and the color of the material. I think there's a middle ground relative to each one of those. Either keeping the color and pulling it back even further. I know there's some equipment that provides strong constraints from doing that. Or placing it on the back of the parapet and running with that location but changing the color. I think what makes the collective successful in its location is that contrast in color. And I understand, reading the guidelines, it does state of a color and material matching or compatible with the colors and material found in the facade of the primary building. But when you take that in conjunction with the other guidelines of locating mechanical equipment as far away from that facade as possible, and that the rooftop should not change the proportions of the architectural composition, I think you need to assume all of those at once to say that then the color would be one of compatibility versus, well, actually a contrasting color could still be considered compatible as well. That's where I'm sitting right now.
I don't have a problem with the spacing on the slats. I don't. If it can come back a foot and a half, it seems like the color change is going to be the issue with me as well. I wish you had provided some sort of rendering of what it would look like if it had moved back, and I could see maybe sort of get a visual of the idea of how that's going to look. I don't think I saw one in the packet, but the coloring is what bothers me, and I agree with Corey. I think it's, the part about the color also must complement the building. It can be contrasting, and that is my concern. Foot and a half might work, but not with that color. And again, I want to just add, I understand they've done this. It's a great deal of expense, but I think we have to look at it with fresh eyes as if it hadn't been done, and are we approving it for the first time? And so that's where I think we have to stick to that.
Would anyone in the gallery like to speak to this? Mr. Hornbeck, do you have something?
The only thing I was going to point out is I think at this point, what I would hope you would allow us to do is move it back and let's look at it. And then if we still need to consider changing the color, we can. I want you to consider two things when you discuss this idea of changing the color. Number one, I don't think it's going to adhere very well. I think in 5 years or less, it'll look worse if the paint begins to peel. And number two, I don't think it violates any guideline at all by being a color that is very consistent to the brick.
Well, it doesn't violate that guideline, but as it's designed, it does in its location and position. And so the color, the commentary on the color is in light of accepting a location and position that doesn't meet the guidelines. So that's something of a compromise at that point.
The north side will be a complementary color. And, the north side is not red. There it is right there.
Right.
So if we go, at some point, we're going to get closer to the same color there than we will, all three sides of the building aren't the same.
What color is the storefront?
I'm sorry?
What color is the storefront?
Let me go back.
It's black.
It's black. I mean,
Yeah.
I think black would be better than what's there now as well.
I actually agree with you, Corey.
Well, I do understand cost implications of our discussions. I don't want that to go without saying. But I do agree that this product long-term would be better unpainted, and therefore my position would be to look at other colors that this product comes in. And I do understand what that means. But if we're talking about, a successful solution, and we're supposed to look at this as if it's not installed.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I think from where we are and where the owner is, if we have to change the color, we're not going to replace, the material was a tremendous amount of cost. So, changing the color will be less impactful than by painting it than by replacing it.
I agree with that.
Okay.
I mean, that I would think the ideal solution would be to replace it, but I understand the position. What are the, so I understand we have some tight conditions on the north side.
Mariana, was that, or Julie, one of you said, I wish you saw an rendering?
It would help if I could.
Okay. What I want to point out to you is, as you see in that particular photograph, when the screen turns the corner, the part that drops down, and that part, the brick is facing east. For lack of a better term, the stucco is facing north. The section of the screen that is facing east, that is virtually 4 foot tall and turns the corner, when that returns, I can go back and show you an upper picture. That's about the depth of how far back that screen will go back. We won't have to have that little panel there anymore. It will move that far back. And if you go back and look at that relationship in terms of the collective, it is very similar in how far back it will be.
Yes, I understand, and I've been taking notes. When you talk 1.5 feet versus 2 feet at the collective, I understand that's pretty close. It's the color. with that bothers me. It's still too close with that color, and there's not enough contrast in there. That's my concern.
On the roof plan, it shows the 2 mechanical units on the east side to be 10 foot 4 inches back from that edge. Is that the tightest constraint on the east side of the building?
Yes, sir.
So would moving the screen back on solely the east side up to 10 foot 4 inches be an option?
I don't think we can get it adjacent. We can't pull it that far back. I think you have to provide accessibility around the unit, and we could find out what the manufacturer's requirement is, but I think we're actually cheating it in a couple of locations already.
Yeah, I understand it depends which way the unit's oriented. I'd be very curious to know how far back that east side could be pulled. I think pulling back the north and the south side to the back of the parapet is a good idea. I mean, even the south side too.
Corey, would that break up the monotony of the color enough?
I think it would help because what's really creating the color issue is how close it is, and you start to see this all as one volume. But if those screens were even 5 to 7 feet further back, that corner at the top of the brick would be allowed to stand on its own, I think, and then that would be more in the realm of the guidelines of pulling that back from the facade as far as possible, and then it being acceptable in the color that it's in. And so I understand the constraints on the north side, and it kind of goes back to my opening statement of, keeping the color versus keeping the current roof penetration locations. We've gone through the discussion, and if the color is a strong point, then can we move back the east and the south sides?
The color's not the strong point. How it's moved back is the strongest point, Corey. If we have to add new braces, we have to build new braces, we have to make new penetrations in the roof, that's a tremendous cost, and it also penetrates a fairly new solution on the roof. The photographs you're looking at were before the finished roof got completed.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we're kind of stuck in the middle.
David, listening to everybody, do you want an up or down vote on this solution? Do you want to take a...
I'd like an up or down vote on that solution for sure.
Would you take a continuance to the next meeting to bring back documentation of the suggestion to just move it on the north and move it further back, and or leave it as per this and change the color? I mean, I agree the discussion is kind of going around in circles.
Well, we would hope that you would understand the reasons we were hoping you would consider the other two, the compromises, but the color and the spacing. If this isn't an acceptable solution, I'm not authorized by the owner at this time to make any other deals.
Well, that's what I mean. Do you want to take another month to circle back around with the owner?
No, let's go ahead and vote on it.
So, to clarify, the sketch that has been proposed includes a note stating to repaint in a lighter contrasting color.
I drew that before I was able to determine that the material was Trex. I apologize.
No,
You know, but I would say this, if you'll accept that and we change we'd rather paint it than have to figure out a new mounting system and lose the materials that we have. So I would certainly accept an approval if, you know, with an amendment of changing the color.
well, yeah, so in my opinion, I would accept this approach given the screen is a different color, and I would just say contrasting. I don't want to specify lighter or darker. I would suggest that color selection come back to the city for review. And I mean, there's ways to paint anything, really. And I understand the Trex is a pre-finished product, but you know, anything can really be painted if the proper prep is taken and the proper product is selected. And I do understand that long-term that is a maintenance issue, but I would recommend, in addition to submitting the paint color to the city for review, to submit specifications for that painting process, both including the prep and the product that would be used. So I think if all of that were to occur, then I would be okay accepting this.
Just so I understand, I've been following the conversation, and it's been tough for me because I don't know where to go with this. So, Corey, are you saying is that on the conditions that we have listed as a recommendation from the staff, that the condition of moving the screen off the parapet and then reducing the gap between the horizontal members of the screen, you're okay in moving that as long as they change the color of the screen?
Yes.
I'm not making a motion, I'm just
No,
clarifying.
and I think at this point, what has been discussed is moving it to the back of the parapet.
Right, as per the...
Yes, as
and,
per the...
And I heard mostly not to change the spacing, but...
Right.
Yeah, I think the photos that we looked at from ground level the screen's doing its job. So we've been presented with an alternate solution in the form of a sketch that's been proposed by the applicant. We've had some discussion about potentially some conditions that would pertain to this approach as well. Obviously, if there's further discussion warranted, we can do that. Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion.
And the other thing is that he's also proposing to reduce the height, and I think it might be beneficial to include that if you are looking to put some approval verbiage together.
Okay, I'm going to take a stab at it.
Thank you, Laura.
Okay. I'm going to make a motion that we approve the application on the basis that the project complies with the regulations and guidelines of the Downtown Design District Zoning Ordinance as referenced in Section C of the staff report, with the condition that the applicant works with the staff to move the screen off the parapet and locate the screen closer to the equipment per
I would just, I thought the intent was just as per the sketch.
The sketch, which is to
Move
to
it on the other side of
Okay,
the
thank you.
parapet.
Then I'll change that to move the screen off the parapet as per the sketch, to reduce the height as per the sketch, to change the color, to paint the, to change the color provided they get staff recommendation on the application process and the materials?
See, how was that worded previously?
Previously, it was worded change the color of the screen, and I thought the discussion was to a contrasting color, light or dark.
To a contrasting color, okay.
And I think it was suggested by someone up there to submit the specs for the painting prep and the process.
Okay, did you get all that? Do we all agree on that, my motion?
I second that.
That was a Kriegel-Jones motion. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Application is approved.
Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. We will move on to item 6C, and we'll wait for Tony to rejoin us.
I'll go get it.
Item C is DTCA 19-00088 at 701 West Sheridan. I see the applicant is present. Does staff want to introduce this one?
I can introduce it. I think everybody in our office has worked on this one. Yes, I don't know who, if anybody, on the committee, who was on the committee at the time that the mural was originally painted. It was painted without any approvals. When it did come in for design review approval, it was approved with a condition that some of the paint be removed from the brick detailing around the windows. And that the understanding from the meeting was that staff would work with the building owner to determine what those locations were, that the building owner would test patches on how it could be removed successfully. So even though it was approved with the conditions, there were a lot of ifs. So staff did work with the previous managing partner of the building ownership to determine locations. That owner is no longer involved in the project, so the past year we've been working with the new owner who's engaged Preservation and Design Studio to do a test patch. They did. They do not believe it was successful because of the brick on the side of the building was previously painted and it had things attached to it, and so it's not in very good shape. And it's very coarsely textured, so it's hard to remove the new paint. So they have asked in this application to either just approve it as is, or if the committee still feels that the paint from the brick detailing needs to be removed, that they be given another year to do it, because some of the other chemical methods are temperature and weather and humidity sensitive. And Catherine is here to speak further. Our staff recommendation was to try it again in other temperatures to give them another year. It's already been there this whole time. So,
Yeah, the only thing I would
another
add
year?
is, since this came before you, they actually replaced the sills, sorry, I have a hard time with that word, when they wrapped the windows with metal decades ago, they busted the sills off, and so they were flush with the windows. And so some of those had gotten painted when they painted the mural. So all of these have now been replaced. They stick out from the building, and that removed some of the paint. And I think when you look at, there's a clear difference now Because like in this area, you had paint removed because of replacing those, and it's really benefited the overall appearance
Right,
of
yeah,
that
that's a
wall.
good point. Replacing the sills did go a long way. It either went far enough or it reinforced how much of a difference removing just a little bit of paint area does make.
Do we have any questions for staff?
A clarification on, submitted within the packet was a diagram circling what I believe, could we clarify what's being identified in the diagram and what's the extent of what's being proposed?
Yeah. Can you go back to that? Yeah, so this image is what Laura sat down with the previous owner, and they agreed to in a series of meetings on which portions to do the removal. Because at the committee meeting, it was just described as some portions. Because this sketch was recorded maybe 2 years ago is when you had the meeting that assessed that. So that's this sketch. The next drawing is this one is what was submitted for the application we're hearing today, and the difference is they were proposed. This sketch proposes removing more portions near the hair and heads of the figures, whereas staff, on the previous one, staff was trying to stay away from the heads and hairs as much as possible. So it's mainly on the second floor windows in the middle. That's the difference. And staff we're good with either. So there's slightly more proposed here in this sketch on the screen now. There's slightly more proposed to be removed than in the previous one. But if the other tests are not successful, it may be a moot point.
Would the applicant like to add anything? Good morning.
Good morning, Catherine Montgomery with the Preservation and Design Studio. Just one fine point. We're not actually doing the paint removal, but we've been retained by the owner. We're doing the elevator addition on the west side. We're currently engaged with some tenant fit out and fire and life safety. The building was built over many different building periods and is kind of a maze. So we've tried to sort out interior-wise, sort out the maze, sort out the fire and life safety issues. So we've been engaged in doing a lot of things, and this is just one of those outstanding items from some time ago that needs to be addressed. Of course, we would prefer not to have to attempt any paint removal at all. We've made 2 previous attempts with 2 different products, which were basically unsuccessful. But it is the height of summer. Temperatures are very hot. And so if you're not inclined to allow us to just leave it as it is, then we're requesting the additional time so that we can try out some different products, maybe have some more success, maybe even multiple removals. We're also working on the wall court building over at 13th and Walnut, and there was some graffiti there. There's also been, just time, lots of grime and stuff happening there. And I think we're on like 5 or 6 attempts so far to remove graffiti and to remove some of the biologics that are there. So it's quite an extensive process and can take several applications. So the goal is to either leave it alone, which is much preferred, or if we need, and let time do its thing, or if we do need to, then at least give us another year so that we can attempt paint removals during some better weather conditions. And then we'll also have all that work that we're focusing on the interior and the west side completed.
In the review of this application, if a motion's made that includes allowing the applicant an extra year to look at additional removal, does that inherently accept the extent of where the paint would be removed? Or would that come back once the results of this additional testing would occur?
I think either way, it could choose one of these. It could also ask that the locations be re-reviewed.
As part of the motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Presumably by staff.
Okay.
Unless you really want to. But no, but we've asked, if it is continued, we've asked for it all to be reported to the committee, the results of the paint removal.
Just to clarify, right now, this is a code enforcement case because their CA expired. And so we're trying to come up with a solution. I get a weekly email from the code enforcement person, where are we? So I'm hopeful that we can, you guys either agree to vote on it as is, or another year to try the products on it, and hopefully they'll find a product that will actually be able to remove some of the paint.
You mentioned your preference is to keep the paint as it is. Is there a longevity of material substrate that you're...
I don't really know what paint was used on the building itself, but it could take 10 years to fade. It could take 50 years to fade. I mean, it's like any other
I'm curious about,
sign.
are you concerned of damage to the brick underneath it if this repeated attempt?
Well, that's always a concern. Based on the age of this building, I think we've got we don't have it's not like an early 20th century building where the mortar was much softer. It has a little harder mortar. The biggest issue is it has the highly textured brick on it, so we might be successful at getting it off like the top parts, but the down-in parts might take a little more effort. It could be uneven results. We just don't really know. We'll probably start, if we need to continue removal efforts, we'll probably start on, some of the places that are less dense with color, so that we can, so that if we get uneven results, we'll have some information about that before we start in on something that has a lot of color.
Thank you.
I think it's worth noting as well, if I was the only one on the committee when this first came along, if I remember correctly, this was installed without an approval. And so, kind of similar to the last case, and I think it would still apply, we should be looking at this as if it's a proposal and not actually done yet. Is that correct?
Staff has framed this as we're not rehearing the whole merits of the mural in the first place. We're only zeroing in on the merits of the original condition of approval. So thank you for asking.
Do we have any other questions for the applicant?
I'll just make one comment. I mean, I'm completely in favor of giving the applicant more time to investigate this. I think there's no reason not to do that versus leave it the way it is. I do think what's been installed takes away from the architectural character of the building on a primary facade of the building. I would actually, in my opinion, want more removed than what's being shown on these diagrams.
So this diagram was kind of non-specific. Areas are just kind of circled. It's not like brick by brick where removal was going to be concentrated. So what we did in this diagram was that we wanted to be very specific in order to gauge whether the terms of the agreement or the approval will have been met or not. And we were also focusing on, I think the previous discussion was looking at the contrasting colors that go around that frame the windows and trying to remove the paint to expose those contrasting colors. So that's kind of the limits of the outline areas that we have, is being able to be able to see that contrast again.
Yeah, I agree. And when we were trying to assess locations with the owner, we were trying to respect the artwork to a certain extent because it didn't make sense to staff to just blanket remove, to reveal all of the window surround if that made what was left in terms of the artwork, if it read awkwardly.
Right, and just one thing to point out, so, because around the windows, you had different detailing with the colors, and they also stick out. So this is just one example on the left, and that's taken from, can't remember if it's from the front or further north, where you can see that brick detailing, and then with the color around it, it swallows. And so, and then you have this different style of detailing, and then when you have the paint over it, you can't see it. And that's what, when I was making those big circles, it's like, let's try and remove it from these areas because that's the detailing around the brick that we really need to try to restore. And I did not want to get into faces. I also didn't want to get into, there's actually, the ghost sign is in her forehead. And so it's there. Some of it's still there, and I definitely didn't want to get into that because I know that's where that is.
Have there been any digital studies of what it would look like if all of the accent architectural elements were cleaned?
And then just as a reminder, because we do have this picture it's in here somewhere. When I referenced the sill, this is what the building used to look like. And every now and then I remind myself, this is what this building used to look like. And this is when the windows were wrapped with metal, and that's what this is, and they painted gray between the windows. And so then when they removed that, they also removed the paint. And so that is why when you look at that building, you see stripes. And you're seeing stripes because of whatever they used to remove the paint. We don't know what they used, and it did impact the brick, and it impacted the mortar. So I remind myself that's what that building used to look like, and I hate the fact that this happened, and I'm hoping we can get back as much as we can of that detailing. This building has been through a lot.
What I was going to say is that we appreciate the effort, and it appears that you guys are being very due diligent and trying to be as innovative as possible in order to try to meet the standard or the desire in order to get it back to where it was before. So I'm going to move that we approve the application on the basis that the project complies with the regulations and guidelines of the Downtown Design District Zoning Ordinance as referenced in Section C and D of the staff report, with the condition that the application explores additional non-abrasive products and processes for removing paint from the brick detail around the window locations as identified with DTCA-16-00092 are in the applicant's drawing dated July 15, 2019, and present the results to the committee by August 5th of 2020. Oh, did I say 15th? August 15th, sorry.
Oh, motion.
Before we vote, just to clarify, does that accept the proposed extent of removal?
As written, it's saying that either is fine. That either their sketch or RCA sketch is fine.
Okay.
So,
I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Opposed. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item D is DTCA 19-00090 at 1000 North Classen Boulevard. Is the applicant present? Okay. Would you like to lead this one?
This is a request for a parking lot on Classen, on the north east corner of Classen and 9th Street. It's coming before you today because there is a guideline against parking lots on corners. And the guideline speaks to wanting the bulk buildings on the corners, parking lots internal. Parking structures are considered buildings, and so that guideline prohibition on parking lots does not apply to parking structures. This site has a significant grade difference, and I didn't realize that till I went out there to take these pictures. And so they've had to get creative about sidewalks, especially along the street here. And so in the staff report, I discussed the various issues, for example, the sidewalk being located next to the curb is because they're allowed to exceed the grade on the sidewalk. If it is adjacent to the curb, it matches the street. If it wasn't adjacent to the curb, they would have to make it less, and they'd run into an issue because of that steep slope. There's an issue with the location of street trees along Classen because we have power lines. And even if you were to choose some of the street trees we have that are supposed to be shorter, we all know the power company comes in and they love to top those things off, and then you end up with these really strange looking, whatever you want to call them. And so their proposal, and I'm going through here, their proposal is to move all of those back so that we don't run into a problem with the power lines. There was one change which I made by hand on a type of a street tree, and so they've got some landscaping areas and some street trees along Classen. They are providing a sidewalk along both street frontages. They're providing a connection to the existing sidewalk as it goes to the east. This parking lot is needed for the business that's across to the south, across 9th Street. It's an existing business. I believe they've been there three years, and they're growing. And so if you ever go by there and you look when they're in business, you will see they have cars parked everywhere on their site. And while parking is allowed on the street, they have a need for more parking, which is why they have this before you. One of the things that we included in the staff report was a discussion of, to my knowledge, we've had one other case where there was a parking lot proposed on a corner, and that was over by the memorial, the side of the downtown Y that was torn down after the bombing. And when that project came through for the Heritage parking garage, they wanted to leave that small piece of parking lot on the corner, and they said eventually they want to put a building there, but they're not ready to put the building on it yet, because you might or might not remember at the time the property was still owned by a trust of the cities, the industrial trust. So what I've included in this is this business is growing so rapidly, they hope to be able to buy more land to the north of this for a new building, but they might not be able to acquire that, and they know they're going to need a bigger building probably sooner rather than later. I'm not saying that's 5 years down the road, maybe it's 10 years. And this site would work for them to be able to put their new building on it because they will outgrow their current building. I'll also just mention, we just got an application in for their current building because they are currently working on some renovations. It's not a project of the scope that would be forwarded to you all. It meets all the guidelines and regulations. They're dressing up that building, and I think it's going to be, a benefit to that area. And just to the south one block, you might recall, you a few months ago saw the Classen Motor Inn, and they're in the process of obtaining all their permits, and so that building is being renovated. So we have some things going in on this, which is the western extent of the downtown design district. And so with all the information that staff included in the staff report, and the fact that it is anticipated that there could be a building on here, staff is recommending approval of this. There was some minor modifications they made in the parking lot. We did express a concern about how people are going to get across the street. You can't force people to go to the corner to walk across in the crosswalk, and based on the way this is set up, it's possible people could cut across. This is not a high-traffic street. 9th Street isn't. But we did express that concern. So we have representatives here of the now owners. At the time the application came in, the business to the south was in the process of buying this property. They now own it. The owners are here, and representatives from the engineer's office is also here. So whoever...
Do we have any questions for staff?
All right, thank you, Laura, for that presentation. My name is Alec Bass with Wallace Engineering, and we're the engineer for the now owner and applicant for this parking lot project. Like Laura said, this company moved into the location directly south about 3 years ago. That site has 15 parking spaces on it. At that time, they had 10 employees. Now they have 27 employees and are continuing to grow. If you've driven up and down 9th Street, you've seen that all the on-street parking is just parallel park cars everywhere up and down, and they're competing with adjacent businesses for that retail. They do have capital now that they want to put into this existing space to stay in this downtown location and continue to grow in place, with the idea of hopefully acquiring more property. It took them 3 years to get this piece under contract to be able to get this far. So with this being a parking lot, we did work with Laura, and we acknowledged that it was not part of the guideline, but it is going to be necessary for this business to stay here. We are providing 3 times as many landscape points than are required by code. If you look, I don't know if anybody's been to the site, but there is significant grade. There's a slope along Classen. We're proposing 3 short 2 to 3 foot tall block retaining walls for some planters to help break up that straight line, in addition to the street trees that are coming across there. Other items on this, that's really the highlights. It's going to be a clean, all concrete parking lot. We just really like some cooperation on this one if we can get it, and long term they would love to, they're still continuing to try and get more property under contract to hopefully have a bigger headquarters. They're thinking within 5 years they could be at 50 employees. So I'll be here if you have any other questions.
Do we have any questions for the applicant?
I'm fine with it being a parking lot. I don't think it would preclude future development down the road. And I do very much appreciate the attention to the landscaping that's been taken, both around the perimeter and down the center as well. I do have concern about the sidewalk on 9th Street. I don't think that that's the best solution from a pedestrian standpoint. I understand that the site is sloped at 7%, which is greater than the 1 in 25%, but I think there is a solution that incorporates ramps within that as well, and not from the standpoint of doubling back or getting into even guardrails. My understanding is that if a ramp is less than 6 feet and has less than 6 inches in rise, you don't need guardrails. So I think there's, the difference between the 5% and the 7%, I think is close enough to where that sidewalk could be designed in a way to still meet ADA and be located in alignment with the existing sidewalk that's to the east.
Okay. With that, if there's the concern at the driveway approach, we could wrap that back up closer to the right-of-way line. As far as the 5% max longitudinal grade allowed by ADA versus the existing 7% grade, over the distance of this property line, if you were to start at the existing ramp grade at the street and make your way up at that 5% grade, you're going to end up with about a 2-foot differential, 1.5, 2-foot differential by the time you get to the east end. So code, as enforced by Oklahoma City, if we put the sidewalk abutting that back of curb, that allows us to match the existing street grade. And like I said, we could pull it back off of the street for the crossing and the driveway. As far as the doing a multitude of 6-foot ramps that do 6-inch differential, you're also required to have a 5-foot landing at the top and the bottom of that. So by the time you take that full 16 feet, you're better off having a 5% straight run of sidewalk. You gain more vertical change that way. And then if we exceed the 6-inch difference in vertical rise at a slope greater than 5%, if we are not abutting the back of curb, that would trigger the requirement for a handrail. So that's why we've pulled it out there. And as they continue to develop, further to the east, I think engineers are going to have to do the same thing. When they do that, they'll have to bring the curb out to the sidewalk. And then long term, if the urban downtown environment continues to stretch out this way, maybe eventually all that will become just one wide sidewalk.
Yeah, and what I will say is, to the east, the remainder of that block is vacant. Everything has been torn down. So there are pieces of the original sidewalk still in existence, but at some point there'll be new developments coming in, and I would imagine the existing sidewalk is going to be replaced. And yes, this would set the tone. But so what I'm saying is, to the east from here, there is nothing left on that block other than the sidewalk for most. I don't think it goes all the way down to the corner.
And you're saying you could push the sidewalk north, you would just need handrails? You would need
If we pulled the entire sidewalk back towards the property line and pulled it off the curb, yes, it would require handrails. Yeah, because the switchback configuration just wouldn't make sense out here. So it would require a handrail on that full extent.
Okay, but it's, right, could you still cross, you'd have to cross the drive.
Right, there wouldn't be a handrail at the drive. We'd have to figure out a solution there. We'd probably just have to put a landing, which is a 5x5 area with less than 2% cross slope, which is 1 in 50, pretty flat.
Yes.
We would just have to put those at each side of the driveway approach, and then just have the slope across the driveway be at a 5% max, which is the 1 in 20, versus 7% is about 1 in 14, off the top of my head.
Staff would rather the sidewalk be off the curb with a rail, if people are wondering, is a rail okay? A rail is fine.
Yeah,
I also wanted to point out that there's been several applications in the last year who have asserted that it's helpful for all the grading to cross, for the sidewalk to be at the same level as the driveway. And something, I don't completely understand it, I haven't seen it modeled, but something about how the ramps meet. This came up on the parking garage on 4th Street, part of it came up on the Omni Hotel drop-off driveway. So we've been trusting the engineers on that point, but yeah, if the rest of the sidewalk can be moved off the curb, that would be fantastic.
Just for clarification, would the handrail be part of the public improvement and become responsibility of the city of Oklahoma City if we did that, or would we be required to
And
submit?
I can't really speak for
permit?
them. On the surface, I'd say I don't believe so, but you have to, obviously get approval, and that's probably something that will require revocable, and then that would not, I don't believe it's going to be the city's responsibility.
Right, it'll always, even if it's always going to be the property owner's responsibility to maintain out to the curb.
Okay. I was just asking for that in case, however the motion gets phrased, since we're going to have to go get another approval if we are turned down by another department. I just asked that to be phrased in such a way.
Sure, we can, if that happens, Laura and I can work to take care of that.
Would you be open to submitting a option B for that south sidewalk that looks at pulling it in and what that would mean from a grade standpoint and ramps and guardrails and such?
Yeah, I mean, the owner's right here. They're agreeable to it. We can lay that out. It would it would ramp, and then every 30 feet, we'd have a flat landing spot, and then ramp up for another 30 longitudinal feet.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how much guardrail we would end up with.
Okay.
Yeah, to that point, if the committee wants to see that back, you could approve everything except the south sidewalk and have that come back.
And I would think probably just, I don't know at what point, I would think, go back to, this is an existing situation here at the corner, which they can't, well, I guess they could, but it's already there. The city has already done that where the ramp is across the street. So I guess from this point eastward, and I literally would cross it off the drawing, and then if you're okay with everything else, get all of that approved, and then they can provide that additional information.
All right. And then we're just fixed by the existing elevation of the street at the west end and the existing elevation of the sidewalk
Right.
at the east end.
Here to here.
Okay. So then we'd bring back that option in front of the committee for review, or could staff?
Depending on how their motion is, it could go to them if that's what they want, or they could actually say, work with staff on it, which you've been sitting here through the whole meeting, and some of you, this is the first meeting you've been here personally, so, and sometimes they say work with staff on things, but that's really up to them to decide that.
The only thing that I'd like to add is that where you've designated the marks for new lace bark elms, those are fast-growing, weak wood, and very wide, so they will ultimately get into the power lines. You could stay with a lace bark, but not a standard variety. Go to one that's a little more...
And let me say, I'm the one who changed those to lace bark elms just because what they had proposed was not on the street tree list. We knew we were going to be working on coming up with something that works, so I'm to blame for that one.
The lace bark can stay, it's just a variety that's more vertical. They have some that would not get to the power lines.
Okay. And the power lines are all the way out at the curb line at this location.
They're out here.
That buys us a little more space as well.
If there are no more comments, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve the application on the basis that the project complies with the regulations and guidelines of the Downtown Design District zoning ordinance as referenced in Section C and D of the staff report with the following two conditions. One, the sidewalk at the south side of the site along 9th Street be a alternate option be presented. I'd like to see it to the committee that would pull the sidewalk off of the 9th Street curb and in alignment with the existing conditions at the east and west ends of that sidewalk. And the second condition, that the lace bark elms be revised to a species more vertical in nature.
Have a motion?
Second?
Second, that's a Bates-Jones motion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
All right,
Thank you very much.
And as So to bring it back to you, it's just whenever they submit to us, we'll just get it on your agenda? Yeah, okay, gotcha. Yeah, and I'll call you. Okay.
Item 7 is other business, and there
Yeah, it's 10 business
none.
days before it's, but I'll call you. Sorry.
And then item 8, under communications, there are several items under administrative approval. I don't believe we have any comment on those items.
If you have any questions on them?
And then item B is comments from the planning department staff.
We have a meeting next month. So please check your schedules, make sure you're available.
And Deborah had her baby, a little boy named James. He was born, it's either 4th of July or 5th of July.
I thought it was
3rd of
4th, but
July.
apparently it's 3rd or 5th or something.
They're doing well.
Any comments from committee members? And our next meeting date is the 19th, and we are adjourned.